Welcome everyone to Play the Fool Festival 2020, Fool Around Online. I'm Julie Crowley, festival producer and the CEO of Hit That Jive Productions.
And I'm Festival Director Christine Leziak, and we are thrilled to have 6 dynamic clown artists with us here for the next 90 minutes. You will very shortly see Barry Bilinsky, June Fukumura, Meredith Gordon, Pratik Motwani, Kiana Wu, and on screen with us right now is your moderator, Lisa Dawn Daniels. A huge thank you to Trent Crosby, who is our behind the scenes technical wizard, and Tanzi Reule, who is live captioning this event.
Christine and I are speaking to you from Amiskawatsiowaskayakan, known colonially as Edmonton, on Treaty 6 lands, the traditional territory of many Indigenous peoples, including Cree, Saulteaux, Blackfoot, Dene, and Nakota. It is also Métis territory. In the spirit of the treaty and its oral agreements, we are all meant to share this land. However, instead of recognizing and honoring the oral agreements, colonizers set up a system to benefit themselves at the expense of Indigenous peoples. Racism is embedded in the colonial system and in the history of our country, and many of us, including me, benefit from this system. Racial violence continues to be a lived experience for Indigenous peoples, Black people, and people of color. I am making this acknowledgement today to call out my participation and that of the Play the Fool Festival and Hit That Jive Productions in the systems of colonial violence and oppression in our country and in the arts community. I want these systems to change and know that it's my personal responsibility and that of our organization to make change happen. But it's not just about words, it's also about action. Play the Fool Festival and Hit That Jive have committed to seeking ways to amplify Black, Indigenous, and artists of color and their voices, and to take action towards equity in our projects and in the arts community. We are doing anti-racist training and creating more equitable hiring and programming practices for our projects and events. I welcome any communication from members of these communities on how we can do better.
We're here today, so Julie and I, and really our whole community, can listen to the panelists' perspectives and experiences. And now we do recognize there may very well be some hard truths coming our way. And I encourage you all and myself to hold space within ourselves and just see this as a beautiful opportunity to reflect on how we each personally can work towards creating more inclusive, anti-racist spaces and art. Now, there will be a question period for about the last 20 minutes today. So if you have any questions for our panelists, you can just email it to panel@playthefool.ca. That email is below us in the little description. Yeah, so thank you, Lisa Dawn and all the panelists for speaking here today with us. Thank you all who are here watching for being here today with us. Julie and I are going to disappear now, but we will both be in the background listening. So that is over to you, Lisa Dawn.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. And thank you again to Christine and Julie for the warm introduction. I'll now ask the panelists to join me. As mentioned, my name is Lisa Dawn, and I will be moderating today's discussion. I would like to start by stating that we have created a safe space for artists to come together for an open dialogue. The viewpoints expressed are ours alone. We are here as individuals to discuss an issue that is very personal. This discussion is intended to provide a perspective into the lived experience of Black, Indigenous, and people of color performers in the clown and physical theater discipline. Due to the impacts of racism, it may get emotional or heated. We thank you for being here and listening to our stories and our thoughts. Panelists, do you mind to give a brief introduction and tell us where you're located? Barry, we'll start with you.
I'm Tanzi, Barry Bilinsky, Nitsiga Sun. My name is Barry. I'm here in Amiskawatsiowaskayakan, Edmonton, and I am Cree, Métis, and Ukrainian, and from here.
Hi, thanks, Barry. Kiana, can we go to you next?
Hi, my name is Kiana Wu. I'm currently in Calgary, Alberta, but I kind of like to bump all over the place around Canada sometimes. And yeah, that's me.
Thanks so much, Kiana. June, over to you.
Hi, thank you so much for the intro. My name is June Fukumura. I'm a second-generation Japanese-Canadian settler, currently located in Vancouver, the unceded and ancestral territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. Thank
Hi,
you.
hi. Thank you, June. Pratik.
Namaste, everybody. My name is Pratik Motwani. I'm originally from Mumbai, India. But currently, I find myself in Blue Lake, California, which is the land of the BIPoC people.
Awesome. Thanks, Pratik. Meredith, over to you.
Hi, my name is Meredith Gordon, and I am in the United States in Atlanta, Georgia.
Awesome. Thanks so much, everyone. Okay, so in preparation for today, we all came together and agreed upon some topics of discussion. So I thought we could start with the concept of neutrality versus the self. Meredith, you had brought up the classic white face makeup and its historical context. Could you dive into that a bit for us?
Yeah. Well, could you ask the question again, just to kind of
Yeah, we kind of discussed white face in terms of clowning and how we lighten our features and the historical context of that. And I was hoping you could go a little bit further into that.
Yeah, well, I've as a clown, as a performer, I use relatively minor makeup. I don't use a lot of white face necessarily. Generally speaking, sometimes I just wear a nose, sometimes I don't wear one at all. And I think some of the initial interest about this particular issue, I think it may have come up when I was part of an online conversation, which I believe is where I originally kind of encountered Christine, where some folks were literally somewhat offended because one particular artist had brought up the idea of the reality that some cultural aspects that are racist sometimes bleed into our artistic world and in our clowning world. And that became part of the conversation. And part of that kind of touched on some of the makeup and some of the realities of some of the historical aspects. And that just kind of started like a big, huge conversation. And it was interesting for me because in this particular conversation that was happening online, like many conversations do, it focused less on the reality of whether or not this particular makeup style was racist or not, as much as the fact, essentially it was a question of does racism exist, which is kind of like fundamentally kind of like duh. But that's also one of those things that kind of like is often the underlying issue in a lot of these issues is kind of like what is or what isn't racism, and does racism exist, and what is or isn't racist. So I think to some degree, to get into the substance of your question, a lot of that just tends to be subjective. I think a lot of it tends to be kind of who's the artist and what's the artist's intention and who's controlling that and who are they speaking to? Is this like a BIPoC person or an otherwise minority or a kind of a special or unique culture speaking to themselves or speaking about themselves? And is that interpretation somehow getting either confused or misinterpreted or in some cases kind of like hijacked or co-opted kind of thing? That's broadly kind of what happens there.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah, personally, I don't find that I wear a lot of white face makeup either. And I really wonder if that is because of that subliminal erasure of, perhaps our darker features or the whitewashing to become something we're not. Did anybody else have anything they wanted to add on the white face? Kiana?
Yeah, it's interesting too, because when I first started learning clown, when I was studying in theater school, the makeup was just such a huge part of it. There was a whole class that we took on makeup. There was like a big demo. It was like this fun, exciting thing. And like, for me, when I was in school, I just had such tunnel vision, like so focused on like the process and the craft and like learning and taking in all you can. I was like, oh, like this makeup is like part of the process. It's a transformation, and it helps you to like really find that clown energy and that clown character. Cause I remember the first time that me and my ensemble, we all had our very first clown show after we just learned, and we were all getting into clown makeup for the first time. And that like kind of brought like this new energy and kind of this like new level of like exhilaration, because it felt, in addition to like donning the nose, you're like donning this whole other kind of mask almost, which when I do perform clown, which has been rare lately, but my colleague and I, who I typically perform with, we both wear like pretty intense classical clown makeup. And it was only until like recently, when we first kind of briefly touched on this when we were planning, that I really was like, wow, like what are the actual implications behind this? And I still find myself sitting with that energy of like, maybe I really need to consider what this means and what this looks like. Because even like as a Chinese Canadian, when I got into that white face for like the very first time, I was like, wow, this does kind of look stereotypical on me. And I never really clocked that there's stuff to unpack there until I really started thinking about clown as a more like longevity of a career post theater school.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Kiana. June, I see you have something to add.
Thank you. So I perform a clown mask or clown character named Sumiko. And to describe her, she's white-faced. She's got like these Pikachu red cheeks. She's got little tiny red lips. And to me, it's actually interesting because as a Japanese Canadian, I derive a lot of my inspiration from Japanese owarai, which is Japanese comedy. And one of the biggest inspirations for me is Bakatono, who is a character that is played by Shimura Ken. And Shimura Ken is one of the most renowned and just exhilarating clown performers who actually passed away due to COVID this past spring. And he wears white pancake face makeup, really dark, thick eyebrows. He's dressed up like Edo period prince, and he's mocking and making fun of and parodying that era through his clown costume and makeup. So for me, I draw my inspiration not necessarily from the traditional white pancake face makeup of European clowns, but from a different clown lineage and a clown inspiration. And he draws his inspiration from kabuki, and kabuki was actually performed by women a long time ago. It was actually done by courtesans and prostitutes to draw in crowds. It was sort of this new and provocative and rebellious way to defy themselves against no and kyogen, which is the Japanese traditional theatrical forms. And so to me, my clown makeup sort of pays homage to my tradition. And I don't know if a lot of people know that. But to me, that's where that sort of substance comes from. And I love that kabuki was, first proliferated and made popular by women and by rebellious women who were kind of outlandish and sexual and unapologetic. And because it was so popular and it was so just out of the ordinary, it was outlawed for a number of years. And then the government said, oh, well, it's too much. So women aren't allowed to perform in kabuki anymore. And so there's a huge history of gender and identity and women that I pay homage to through my clown makeup.
That's awesome. Wow. Thank you very much for providing that other side of the coin. That's great. Thank you. Barry, what do you have to add?
Just to kind of riff off of what Meredith and June in particular were speaking to about, the context of it. The idea that, we're still having arguments about whether or not racism exists in North America, and having that debate. And I think that clouds over this issue. Like, I don't think painting your face is particularly racist, but in the context of North America, where we've had people painting themselves red and going out onto Hollywood screens and painting themselves black and literally, mocking the people that they are in the process of killing on the other side of the street, like, because there is that history that is still being unearthed and realized, that's when it becomes touchier with these kind of those kind of tropes. And the trying to figure out when is it appropriate to do it, and is it just inherently bad, or is it because we're not in a place to be having having your faces painted white? Or you have to really look at the context, like what festival are you at, what performance are you doing, what is your statement, all those kind of things, and how does that influence whether or not painting your faces is being read as trying to be white or whitewashing yourself, or if it is, really just the artistic practice, like June was saying, like it has a much deeper heritage to it. So it's complicated.
Absolutely, I agree. Context plays a big role in theater, and I think even June spoke a little bit about how maybe people don't know that historical link there, and so even though that exists, the audience might not know that. So again, context. Meredith, I see you have something to add. Oh, you're just muted.
Hey,
One
so
quick.
Do it.
I know. Are we going to keep score on this?
Yeah,
I've got a pin.
Only Barry will.
Exactly. Just one quick point to kind of follow up on that. One thing that I particularly found strength in this larger discussion was, first of all, there's this one particular artist was bringing up the issue, and then I really saw in the bringing up the issue and in clowning itself that a lot of what I've experienced in the 20 or so years I've been working as a clown is that regardless of the makeup, the act that I am a clown, that I'm an African-American clown in a largely white world, that can be interestingly empowering, where, in the same way that like in Shakespeare, sometimes the clown can mock people, make fun of them, and rib them and make them laugh in ways that maybe they don't even know they're being mocked. Not that I'm always necessarily doing that, but there's power in being able to choose to take on the role of a fool, and then to kind of call out power and to make people laugh at that. And that's I think that kind of speaks to the broader issues of as Barry was saying, it's like, so what's your intent, what's your message, who are you speaking to, where are you speaking from, and all of those bigger issues.
Absolutely. Awesome. Okay, so along the same lines, also in terms of neutrality, we talked about neutral mask, or the idea of eliminating the uniqueness of yourself to come to a place of neutrality. So Barry, I think you brought it up specifically in relation to training methodology or pedagogy. Could you talk to us a little bit about that?
Of course. So I'm part of a duo, red leather, yellow leather, with my Cantonese counterpart, Bill Yong. And we trained in the pachinko style mask with a couple of teachers here in Edmonton and across Canada. But the big thing that we found from that process, is that there's a lot about finding like economy and neutrality and universality in yourself, in your body, in your gait, in the way that you move, that you need to try and find those things. And there were some instances where we're like going down to elementals, but when we're starting to talk about the neutral mask, it was a difficult process for Bill and I to realize that at a certain point, neutral started to feel awfully white. Like it was just like, be stoic, calm, in control, very simple. And because of the context, because of the university that we're learning in, because of the city that we're in, because of the effects of, decades of being in schools with other kids where you're constantly expected to act more like everybody else and less like somebody different. It felt like that was starting to seep its way in. And we've been through a big process of trying to figure out, is that our personal experience of it, or is it inherent to that process? Which is kind of how we center it. But it was just something to flag, which is, what is your baseline? What is your normal? And then that comes into other questions about gender or about ableism or anything. Like, what is the baseline that you are starting from neutral as your universal to then go from? That's kind of where I was coming from with that. Yeah.
I see we're all nodding. Pratik, you have something to say?
Yeah, I often think of this, this thing of neutrality, and I'm moving more and more away from it. I did train, in a physical theater, had a physical theater education where neutral mask was a big part of my training. But as the word neutral is something that I have a problem with, because it assumes that it's like a reference point, and it's a place of judgment. In terms of from this point onwards, here is character, and from this point it's not. I tend to view it as another mask, just another mask, just like I would explore a pantalone or any other character masks. That this is another mask that has another set of things that I need to fulfill with my body and with my energy. So I do find value in kind of engaging and finding economy of movement and how that relates to the idea of neutrality. But I hate the term neutral or neutrality, because as far as I'm concerned, it's all polarities. There's no neutrality. That I understand myself because I understand myself in relation to something else, and not in relation to a neutral place. There's no neutral place. So yeah,
as humans, what does it even mean? How can we pare away all of our lived experience and find this mythical neutrality? And is it even necessary, is something I started to really question. I understand the intent of it, and it absolutely is a great exercise, but when it comes to the creation of my work, I personally don't go a lot to the neutral mask. I don't know if you guys have different experience there, but did anybody else have something they wanted to add on neutral masks specifically, or Kiana?
Yeah, the more you think about like the neutral, like the when you study neutral mask, it kind of assumes there's like this universal neutral that everyone should be able to access. Like you're finding the neutral, and you go through, anyone who's trained in any type of neutral mask, like you go through the classic, like find the neutral body, find the neutral mind. And that exercise was very valuable to me as like a young actor in a theater school program. But when I look back on it, the things that were more valuable from that experience was when we got into like the elemental, like water, air, because that felt more accessible. Whereas this kind of mythical, universal neutral, the longer I've been kind of away from a training program and a training institution, the more I think that there isn't kind of a universal neutral that's accessible to all human beings. Like I don't really use neutral in my work with my partner for clown, but I can see how it would be useful to find your neutral, like the neutral that you can access for you personally, because I feel like my neutral would be different from everybody in this panel and everybody else who's studied clown. What is neutral for me isn't going to be neutral for somebody else. So I just struggle to come to terms with the idea of there being a universal neutral for everyone, because everybody has such different backgrounds and different lived experiences that trying to find a universal neutral that will work for everyone kind of seems futile, and I feel like is less beneficial to the work.
Seems like a fool's errand, dare I say. Pratik, you had something you wanted to add?
Yeah, it just reminded me of a time when so we all come from different cultures, and every culture has with a culture comes its own set of aesthetics and its own set of ways of expression. So I remember when I came to the US, when I would get into a debate, I would get involved into a debate, and people would be like, "Why are you being aggressive?" And I'd be like, "I'm not being aggressive. What are you talking about? I'm debating." And they're like, "Whoa, you're being aggressive." I'm like, "What are you saying? Are we debating or are we not?" Like, what are we doing? So it's expression is like, it comes from culture, and we haven't quite reached a place of universality in terms of like expression. So how can we reach a place of neutrality, a point of, who decides what's physically polite and what's not? We have different understandings, different relationships to space. In India, people say your personal space ends where your nose ends. So because that's the kind of culture that we live in. It's a more communal. So anyways, it just reminded me of that.
That was awesome. Thanks so much for sharing. Okay, so moving a little bit away from the concept of neutrality, we wanted to talk a bit about the depiction of our cultures in the media or on stage. So what's the difference between an archetype and a stereotype? And how can we differentiate between a culture being celebrated as opposed to being mocked? Does anybody feel strongly like they'd like to speak first on this one? June?
Sure, yeah. So my understanding of archetype kind of is derived from Plato's forms, which was then used by Carl Jung to kind of parse out various underlying psychological or personality types. For example, the hero, the caregiver, magician, healer, the rebel, which sort of exists on a subconscious level. Or a story archetype like the rags to riches, or overcoming the monster, or the quest, the hero's journey, these kind of archetypical depictions of a human storyline, for example. So in my mind, I recognize archetypes as something that we can all kind of, there are parts of ourselves that perhaps we can all kind of take from. Like I could be a hero, I could be a rebel, I can be a nurse, you could be a adventurer, all these types of sort of depictions or characteristics, personality traits. For me, the difference between that and a stereotype is I believe stereotypes are rooted in overgeneralizations of race, gender, age, sex, abilities, geographic locations, and all of the above in various configurations. And stereotype seems to be a kind of subconsciousness and an overgeneralization of these groups. And dare I say, I don't think stereotype is necessarily a bad thing. I think it's often used in a bad connotation, but similar to sort of this white face makeup, context, I think, is so important. Like stereotype is derived from pattern recognition. It's like we're trying to, assume or predict what you might do based on some of the patterns that I've learned and assumed and made unconsciously the truth. And I think where it really goes sour and starts to become even violent is when those assumptions about the other or a group of people are not checked and they're filtered through our minds as reality, as the fixed reality of truth, and when we don't investigate it. And so for me, my play and my exploration through Sumiko, my clown mask, is the exploration of my own assumptions around Japanese images or stereotypes and what other people might assume about a Japanese stereotype. And to shine a big spotlight onto these assumptions in order to disrupt it, in order to shake the ground underneath it so that something falls through, falls apart, breaks open, transforms. And to me, that's where the clown can really thrive, because they're pushing that boundary. They're making the unconscious conscious through play. And that's really challenging to do in this socio-political climate right now. But I think maybe clown is the one key that's possibly able to still open up people's hearts and minds, because there's the element of play and complicité and togetherness. So that's where my curiosity leads me.
Very cool. Yeah, and I agree. I think stereotypes in themselves are not harmful. It's when we allow them to become ingrained in us and become prejudices, you know, where we start to have a prejudice against people because of these stereotypes that we've allowed to, you know, seep in, basically.
Yeah, there's
Meredith. Sorry, June, go ahead.
There's this really beautiful quote that I heard from Hot Brown Honey, which is an incredible Australian Indigenous femme group of burlesque performers and performers of all sorts. And they say that stereotype, it's not that it's wrong or not true, but it's incomplete. And I think that's really rings true to me.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for sharing. Meredith, I saw you maybe had something to add.
Okay, that's two.
That's two.
We are all still clowns. Don't worry.
Okay. Somebody's keeping score. Okay. But tagging on to one of the things that June was talking about, I often, in some ways, I take this for granted because I've always been an African American. So I've always been Black. So that's kind of given for me. But often in my hospital work, in my hospital clowning work, I'll either directly or indirectly have the experience of someone saying, well, you're the first Black clown I've seen, or there's a connection there that happens because I'm like them. And to me, that kind of, it's kind of, I don't know if that's, it's certainly it's not archetype necessarily. Is it stereotype or is it just merely representation? And I think one of the things that June mentioned, which I think is really true in terms of either bridging the gap or kind of like having some type of representation, I think that's huge because in the midst of all of this, and particularly this current racial awakening we're in, here in the US, we're dealing with the police deaths of Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery and George Floyd. And I think those are all very large and kind of like prickly and multi-layered issues. But I think what June said is I think the core of it is that many of the assumptions that our culture makes and the police makes are just simply incomplete. That they're incomplete in ways that Breonna Taylor was created or was treated, and the people in her culture where she lived, the police wouldn't treat people in their neighborhood that way. If there was someone who had that same situation, the police wouldn't go into their neighborhood or into an apartment complex if one of their loved ones lived there. And I think to me that speaks to like the archetype and also representation. I'm always aware as being one of the few, in large cases, one of the only African-American members of my clown team, that I work in a hospital where I clown in a hospital. I'm a hospital clown, among other things. But in the hospital, the people who clean the floor and take away the trash are almost all Black. At the top of this structure, there are, and I know that like in many cases, being the African-American clown, I kind of cut through that in a way, in many ways, again, speaking in terms of being able to like mock people or to kind of be a clown that has fun within that world. My character tends to be rather high status by choice. I mean, that's kind of like my general kind of mode is high status. I try to play low when I need to or when I can, but my neutral or my kind of automatic tends to be a little more higher status. And I'm always aware kind of, you know, how that status kind of plays in the hospital. And of course, the high status clown only thinks he's smart. He's just as dumb as everybody else. He just thinks he's brighter than everyone. But it gets into that whole archetype of kind of like, for me, it's like representation and knowing that in many cases, my mere presence of not putting whatever artistic or creative skill I may or may not have, my existence of who I am when I walk into some of these spaces is a statement of its own. It's a statement beyond whatever training I may have And sometimes, hopefully, if I'm representing myself well, it's good. But if I'm a bad clown, or if I'm just bad at my job, then it's not good. But I think for me, it speaks to, in many ways, kind of like representation and being that example that otherwise wouldn't be there.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Barry?
Yeah, I mean, I'm running the risk of repeating it, but yeah, this idea of visibility and access, and just to kind of add that, you know, stereotypes are there, and they become dangerous when we only have very few instances of seeing it. You know, if there was Indigenous people from all spectrums of life represented in film and television and in stories and everything, then, you know, you would know that there's so many different facets to an individual. You would know that this is not the Indigenous clown, this is, you know, this particular Indigenous clown, and you get to start to see the breadth of it. And I think in Canada and the United States, you know, we've been inundated with so many European-centric stories that's actually what helps us be able to hold that space and be able to start to play with stereotype and not have it be so volatile. Because if I go out there and I play drunk, there's an assumption already that people are like, yeah, I've seen that. And then they latch onto it and they believe it. And it's like, you know, I'm allowed to explore all these different facets. It's not automatically saying that all Indigenous people are drunk. Like, and so just to be able to, just to be able to assist in other art forms, creating like love stories and all different types of stories to get more representation helps us as clowns when we're commenting on things.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point that you use. You know, sometimes as an Indigenous performer, I feel like I need to be hyper aware of these stereotypes. So when I was creating my one-woman show, One Clown's Trash, I have a bottle of water. And initially it was in a glass bottle, but there was a perception that it could be viewed as alcohol. Mm-hmm. Because of that glass bottle. And I wondered, you know, if I wasn't an Indigenous clown, would anybody question if that was water? Only for us Nietzsche's is it fire water. No, I'm just kidding. But I just questioned that, you know, and I just wondered if other artists would have had to have been that hyper aware of that perception. And I don't know the answer. Pratik, I see you had something to add.
Yeah, this word that you bring up, perception, is a really fascinating kind of word, is because, and June, you mentioned this earlier about pattern matching, that we make meaning out of pattern matching things. And so who are the perception builders? This is where like power comes in and the dominance thing comes in. And who has the platforms to build dominant perceptions? And those are the perceptions that are going to prevail, like, you know, on a larger scale. Those are the perceptions, those are the patterns that people are watching. And so they're going to connect those things. And so, you know, stereotyping is a result of that. It's interesting that as a clown thing, we're talking about stereotyping, where clown has been completely stereotyped into like a scary thing. It's been reduced to, you know, clowns are scary, you know, and so people are moving to other names, you know, fool, or, you know, the lunatic, or, you know, lunatic is still like something else, but the chaotic force or something. They're trying to redefine clown and move it away from the word because the word has gotten stereotyped. And so, yeah, it's really interesting, the thing of perception. And that's where we come in as well as artists. We are constantly creating new perceptions, whether we like it or not.
Yeah, great point. June.
Yeah, that's a really great point that you make, Pratik. And I think you're right. Like, it's pervasive. It's a cloud. We can't see it. We just feel it. We know it. It's subconscious. And this is why it's so dangerous. And who controls it? The people who are dominant. And they don't want us to know that those are the thoughts that are going through our heads when we're assuming something about someone. My exploration, it brings me back to, so how do we then take these stereotypes and transform it? And I think one thing that I'm really curious about is, okay, you know, I'm on stage, my body is politicized. People are going to assume lots of different stories about me, regardless of whether I have a painted face or costume on or not. And so my exploration has brought me to, okay, I'm going to invite people to assume lots of things about myself by the way I dress, by the way I put my face on. And I want people, I'm sort of drawing people in to bring their stereotype into the audience as a framework, as a story, so that I can break it when I'm performing. It's kind of a way to draw people in a little bit. And I'm like, you know, you think that this is a geisha, right? This is what you know about a Japanese lady. Come on in, come join me in this exploration. And then through my performance, I'm hoping that I can use that as the backbone or the framework in order to break that stereotype. It's kind of this play between, all right, well, here's a framework, here's a story that you know, let's use that. How can I almost weaponize the thing that is used against me as fodder for play and inspiration? And that has brought me to a really interesting dynamic between feeling oppressed and repressed by the narratives that surround me, to then go, how can I harness that and make it my own? It's sort of like reclaiming this narrative that's so beyond me, outside of me, that other people control. And again, clown is one of those sort of liminal spaces where I think it's possible.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a lot of really great points that you make. You know, the reversal of expectations and really using these things to our advantage as performers. I think there's a lot to be said about that. Kiana, you had something to add?
Yeah, I'll just touch on it briefly because I feel like there's been a lot of great conversation around this already that I risk reiterating. But there is something, like June said, like clown is that liminal space where it's just the right form, where this kind of play between inviting the stereotype in order to break it down just kind of works with the form. Like it fuels this energy and this story that you can tell, because you invite the audience in with these things they know in order to change their opinions and change their knowledge and provide them with this information. And it's a space where you can do that. And I always find with clown and various types of physical theater, like it's a great way to do that pretty safely for an audience because of the structure of the form. Like there's a certain expectation around the form where this kind of exploration really, really works. And when we brought up the like scary clown stereotype, which of course is there, I always forget about it, but of course is there. I remember like the first foray into kind of like inviting the stereotype into flipping it was the very first clown show that I ever did with an ensemble of people. Happened on Halloween in the year where there was like a scary clown phenomenon running around Edmonton. So people were like, oh my God, a clown show? Oh, scary clowns. Like, so we actively as a collective invited in this like stereotype of like the scary horror clown with like this, I won't describe it in too much detail, but we had these very scary clown masks at the beginning to like lean into the stereotype. But then the unmasking was to offer what our clown was going to be. So, and it worked really well for the form. So I think there is something to be said that it's great that there are people who are, and I'd love to be one of those people when the world is a little bit less intense, who takes those stereotypes and like flips them and uses them to explore and teach and learn yourself. It's a really great opportunity with this form.
Absolutely. There is almost a certain level of safety, I want to say, that comes with comedy, because we are able to manipulate the energy in the room, and you know, we can drop these hard truths and make people really think, but then we can also make them laugh and bring them back to a better place. So I often feel that comedy has a certain je ne sais quoi, you know, we can touch people in ways that other art forms maybe can't, and specifically clowning. Thank you so much, everyone. I feel like we really got into that one. So moving on, do you feel that you faced unique barriers, or there are certain institutions in which you were not welcomed or did not belong, perhaps due to the color of your skin or because of socioeconomic circumstances affecting you? What were the implications of these barriers for you as an artist? Barry, do you mind to kick us off on that one?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I benefit, I guess, in this society of, being fairly white passing. And it started to really become apparent when I was in university. And there was just so many little things that I wasn't connecting with, or, cultures that were just seeming like they were supposed to be people were just supposed to have done it. People were supposed to have gone to drama camp. People were supposed to have seen a play before they were 17. Like, there was a whole bunch of expectations that I realized more and more. I was like, oh, okay, so it's not just about skin color. It's also about like the community that I'm from, my upbringing, my perspective on things, our family's perspective on things. And it slowly started to deteriorate that idea that it was simply about how I passed or how I looked like. And I think like those barriers, I guess what I can speak to is that I can see it more for some other individuals. I've worked out in reserve communities, and I've done certain things, and just like what people think they can do, what they imagine themselves doing, being in film, being in television, or things like that, it seems so far away. And so, I've tried to center a lot of my work about breaking that down and making it so that it's not as far away. Yeah, that's pretty much where I'm at right now. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, definitely. I mean, I was raised here in Edmonton, and there is a certain large theater company here that has a lot of young people theater classes. And if your parents can afford to put you in those classes, the chances of you working for that theater company as an adult are very high. So being an individual that was never put in those theater classes and then trying to emerge onto the theater scene here in Edmonton and seeing, just that those who have those linkages, the networking that you get, all the privilege that comes with being able to afford to go to those classes at those institutions as young people really did give them a leg up in getting work there as an adult. So that's definitely something that I felt personally. Go ahead, Barry.
Yeah, let me flip my thing there, because actually, well, it actually led me into why I got into clown, because I wasn't fitting into so many of those pieces. I didn't know anything about Pygmalion or why I should care about it, or cucumber sandwiches or whatever. I was like, okay, let's just figure this out. But then when I was starting to get into clown, I had avenues to be able to tell my own stories, to be able to show little pieces of what I saw in a more ephemeral way, and in a way that was a bit more abstracted and didn't have to fit into, a fun springtime show. So I found clown actually to be really accessible for that. Especially because it's a methodology, a training process. So, you can start to pick it up and play with it wherever. And I've heard that from a few different Indigenous actors that I've come across, that like clown really resonated for a lot of them, because it gave them a paradigm that they could kind of talk about intuition, and they could formulate a structure that wasn't based off of Stanislavski or any of those other Eurocentric institutions.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree wholeheartedly that clown was my bridge, my way of getting over what I saw as, a gap that I didn't feel I could cross at one point. Kiana, I see you had something to add.
Yeah, it's interesting because I also didn't grow up in Edmonton, but I did do my post-secondary in Edmonton. And yeah, there is a certain, like, you go and you do an acting program or a theater school program, and there is like, of course, pretty heavy like European backgrounds of like the classical theater, and like those things are great, and I love the classics and I think they're really important, but it's not always like super accessible for everyone, I find, and even less so the classics, because you can be anyone and have loved Shakespeare or have loved Shaw. And it's just, there is like a certain kind of like institutionalized marginalization that comes from any big, not just the university. I attended probably any post-secondary institution, Canada, the States, all over the world has this kind of institutionalized marginalization that I certainly experienced while I was in school. And any one of my classmates of color or any other person of color I've talked to who's gone through a training institution has had those doubts and those experiences of facing barriers. But the wonderful thing about clown was within this university with these barriers and these, that is inherently problematic, as they all are, even though there is a wonderful movement for change right now. Clown was always accessible to everyone. Like this methodology, this pedagogy, it always welcomed everyone, because the red nose had fit everyone. Everyone had a way to find their clown persona, and there was no barrier. In at least the way I was trained, there was no barrier for anybody. Everybody was learning this methodology, and because of the nature of the work, everybody had a way in to this methodology. So I know for me, after I partway through my training, when we studied clown, suddenly I felt like I had this access that I hadn't had before, because it was the one unit where I was like, I'm not facing the same kind of barriers that I am so used to. Like, this is so much more open to me, and I'm not questioning, is it because of the way I look or my racial background or my social class, or like, is it because of all of these other things? With clown, it was, no, this is just clown, and we can all access this form. So that's, I hope that made sense, but that's kind of where my mind is at on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much. Meredith, I see you have something you want to add. There we go. Third time's a charm.
There. Okay. Yeah. Two quick points. What Barry and was just said about clowning kind of being more open. For me, I started out, as a theater student, and I moved around and did a bunch of Shakespeare, largely because everybody's doing it, kind of thing, or it's not hard to find someone doing it somewhere, and found a little bit of a home there. But when I started lurking more in the improv world, when I started working more in the clown world, my sense of what was available just got much bigger, because I wasn't dealing with having to kind of like fit into a particular role. Improv and clowning is kind of like, it's each show, for the most part, they're all created to do whatever, which was really nice. The other thing I'll say is back, I think, to the original question. Just as an African American in the United States, my neutral, to go back to a common phrase before, or at least my starting point, is I've always felt the expectation that pretty much anything that I do, I have to be demonstrably better than other people to get an equal opportunity to do things. And unfortunately, in many instances, I've experienced that. I've experienced the reality that I basically have to work a little harder to convince people to get over any mistakes that I make, because I make mistakes and other people make mistakes. One of the challenges is, and this is often a trope, is that if an African American or if a marginalized person makes a mistake, well, then that was your one chance and you're kind of shoved away. Whereas other people, if you're kind of, I'll use a phrase, if you're kind of like the standard white guy or the standard white girl, you make a mistake, and that's just part of the learning process. Of course you're going to still be in charge. Of course you're going to still learn, because that's kind of like just the system as it's kind of either supposed to be or as it often kind of tends to be. And I think in some instances that's a matter of kind of sameness, people kind of like working with people who are like them. And in many instances, the people who are your colleagues or your peers at an institutional level or at a directing level kind of are like that, and they kind of want to be with each other. And so that's one of the challenges that I particularly have been having. And I know others have them as well, but that definitely speaks to me in terms of having to kind of always prove myself. And all of us as artists want to do better. We want to be better than we can, or as we be the best that we can be. But I've always felt the expectation that in my music, in my performing, that I literally have to be noticeably better to be considered essentially equal.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's also a very valid point. Thanks so much for raising that. So moving on, in my experience, I feel there is a certain level of tokenism that comes along with the Black Lives Matter movement and the concept of reconciliation here in Canada. Many organizations want to say that they are allies, however, they do not put their money where their mouth is, so to speak. Do you ever feel that you're being asked to participate more as a token than as a real contributing member to an organization? Pratik, would you mind to kick us off with this one?
Sure, I might take the rest of the time, but no.
I'll start doing this.
Okay, so for all this is like linked for me, like everything that we speak, culture, power dynamics, the what is it, stereotyping, which is like, and June, you mentioned like it's not your full self, or I don't know, that's what I got from it. And the concept of bringing your whole self into a room is not, it's the systems within which we operate that, what was your question? Your question was related to
tokenism.
Tokenism, yes. So, and tokenism is great for capitalism. Stereotyping is great for capitalism. It works perfectly. And so in a world that lives in capitalism, theater and art lives in capitalism. And so I don't know how to get out of it, frankly, out of that thing. I was thinking of earlier in terms of unless there is representation at the leadership positions, there is cultural competency. You will be tokenized, because knowingly or unknowingly, you will be put into a slot, because that's the perception from which you're being viewed. So it's a thing. Like for me, I had to come to terms with the term person of color, because I wasn't a person of color in my home country. But when I came here, I realized that whether I like it or not, I am a person of color. Because I'm put into that box and I'm treated like that, and therefore that becomes my reality. So yeah, I don't know how. I feel like we'll have to get out of capitalism, or there needs to be like a severe power redistribution and resource redistribution for that to happen, or people start making their own companies and start doing their own work in order to get de-tokenized.
Wow, that really, the whole concept of the leadership and, who's running the show, and as long as they're not, relatable to our lived experience, they're going to tokenize us. I think that really just blew my mind a little. Go ahead, Pratik, if you have more to say.
One more thing that I really want to say is that the whole idea of having representation of the leadership is not just a thing of number. It is that there are geniuses in each culture, and we lose out on that by just we lose out on the collective genius that we can possibly achieve. There's knowledge and wisdom. There are languages that get lost. Anyways, so that's why it's important, not to fill up a number.
Absolutely. And I think what you said about cultural competency, That is so important, you know, and here in Canada, we want to say that we're multicultural and we celebrate multiculturalism, but where is that cultural competency and where is that representation? So I think a lot of what you said is, I'm going to be up tonight thinking about what you just said. That one's going to sit with me. Kiana, I see that you had something you wanted to add.
Yeah, I just jumping off what Pratik said, it's the idea that like some things just get lost when there's not, like languages that get lost. Like my grandparents speak a dialect from China that like is a dying dialect, and I just think about that, and I don't speak it, and I wish I did, but things like that just can get lost when there isn't this kind of representation there. And I have a difficult time with tokenism as a thing, because I know that it happens and I know that it's happened to me and I don't like it, but like I also am like, if you want to hire me, you're going to hire all of my opinions, so I'll be your token, but you hired me, so you also get my voice, not in a negative way, just like you hired me, and so I may be a token in this room, but at least one of me, or one of someone like me, or a person of color has had access to this room and can bring in these voices and hopefully help affect like some new perspectives or like change from within. And I would love to move away from feeling like a token, because I so struggle with like, it's already so hard to be a performer and an actor and everything's unstable. And like, I really want to feel like I earned the job when I get into that room. Like I am there because I work hard and I did my best work, and that's why I'm there. And like Meredith said earlier, like when you're a person of color, you do feel like you have to work like 500 times harder than everyone else just to be on equal footing and to get those equal opportunities. And everyone of my friends who is also a person of color feels this way, and we've had long discussions of it. And I would just love to find a way to move away from thinking every time I booked a gig, did I get this because I was the best, or did I get this because I'm diverse? And I don't know how to move away from that.
No, I think that's a really great point, Kiana. And what you said really makes me think about the line between representation and tokenism. And to me, it's about that organization hearing what you say and incorporating your ideas. So it's not just about checking that equity box. Yeah, we've got an Indigenous employee. Yeah, we've got a person of color. But actually listening to that individual and incorporating their ideas. And that's where I feel like I'm no longer a token and I'm actually part of the organization. June, I saw maybe you had a little.
Yeah, Kian, I couldn't have said that any better. That's exactly how I feel too. Why are you hiring me? Are you hiring me because of my skill? Are you hiring me because it looks good on your reports? Right? Like that's such a hard question. And that's such a hard thing to live with as an artist when we're also trying so hard, doing our very best to put ourselves out there. And one thing that I really struggle with in terms of tokenism is when, like you said, Lisa, when they're like, oh, well, we have a Japanese person in the room, so she is now the authority of all things Japanese. And I think, my God, no. Being Nikkei, Japanese Canadian or Japanese American, we have an array of experiences like everyone else, and therefore putting me in the position of being the single Japanese Canadian in the room going, what's the answer? I'm going, oh my God. First of all, I'm contending with the model minority myth of having to be this spectacular, amazing, smart individual, also which was used against Black and Indigenous people. That's super shitty. But also contending with the representation and respectability politics of my community. And so you can't just have one of us. You can't just have each of us and call it a day. You need to hire from top down, from bottom up, an array of individuals who represent an array of opinions and diverse perspectives in order to have the mosaic that we're looking for. You know what I mean? That really frustrates me.
Not agree more.
Yeah, absolutely. Barry, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, we're all rallying behind the same feeling here. The idea of like Indigenous leadership. Quick story, I was at a festival gathering where we were supposed to be looking like 10 years into the future, and all the festivals in Edmonton are there, and they're all saying like, dream big, dream anything, dream whatever you want. And it was like, I dream we had infinite money, ha ha ha. I dream we had access to all of these venues. I dream this, I dream that. It's going up on the board. And then I kind of like said, well, I like dream that we step away from Indigenous inclusion and start to really honor Indigenous leadership in the city. And it like record scratch, and they turned around and she was like, can you explain that? I was like, I thought we were dreaming. Like, you want me to have an action plan for you on it? Like, why can't that go up on the board? And it just realized like, there's so many institutions that feel like they have led the groundwork, that they have put in 50, 60 years, they've built this country, and that they have like gotten to the point where they get to do these things. And then we have all these voices that need to come in, and we have all we have to get, morally, we need to be more diverse. Morally, we need to have more inclusion. But like what Pratik was saying, like if we start building our own organizations and start competing for funds and start changing the paradigm by doing it ourselves, all of a sudden they're contending with us. They're changing they're changing their programming to try and like, vie for audiences. And we're just part of the competition at that point. So I think like, I'm starting to get away from even looking for the handouts or thinking about it being tokenism. They're asking me to come in to help their organization. Great, pay me for it and we'll figure it out. But like, I would love to try and help our organizations, and they're doing it across Edmonton. There's so many Indigenous, not just artists, but a whole bunch of organizations that are just taking the initiative themselves and taking it back and being like, no, we're just going to do it ourselves then. And so it kind of turns the whole idea of inclusion on its head. Problem is, we're still in this power structure where the major regional theaters are run by the same people, are getting most of those funds. So if we're going to start distributing those funds into more smaller organizations or startup organizations, I think that's where it's going to start to change. So that there are places that are focused on those different stories and focused on that breadth of storytelling, not just throwing in a native show once a year.
Yeah, absolutely. Kiana?
Yeah, and that's fired up. This is like so, it's that institutionalized change that I am like so desperate to see. And like, I want to help and I want to be a part. And I definitely have done, I've sent emails and I've had conversations with people that weren't incredibly pleasant for me because I wanted to help make institutionalized change. But the problem is that you don't see the change happen unless they're willing to integrate it at, like June said, like every level. It can't just be, oh, we're going to diversify the cast of our shows, diversify every aspect of every part of your production. Then like it's like, and not to like extreme levels or any, like it's all change takes time, but it's important to, I feel like, actually put these things into practice, because I can come and sing you the songs of the experience that I've had for days and for years. I could do that, and I will do that, of course, because I want to see that change happen. But until you have someone at a high level of power who is willing to help you induct this change everywhere, it's only so much you can do. So I find myself, I often get frustrated because I'm like, how do you do that? And then the idea that I'll speak on one more thing and then I'm just spiraling, but that June said of you, when you're like the POC in the room, they're like, oh, so you'll handle every POC issue we have with the entire production. And that makes me so uncomfortable because like, I'm a Chinese Canadian, like I'm half Chinese and half white. I do not have the authority to speak on issues for all people of color or even like all Chinese people. Like, I already have such a complicated relationship with my own racial background. I can't speak for the whole room. I'm going to put my foot in my mouth too. We all have to be willing to learn together and we need more of a team to deal with these issues than just pinning it all on like your one diverse cast member, your one diverse designer, artist, you know.
I have a trick for you on that one, which is that when they pin it on you, just start like really genuinely putting out the most racist shit possible, because it's not your responsibility. Like, you're not being paid to do it, so they're all looking to you for answers. You just start generating, oh yeah, of course we should do this, of course we should do that, and then eventually someone will figure out like, oh shit, somebody should actually be in charge of that knows what they're doing, and then they have to pay them. So that's what I
teach
see.
them the hard way is what Barry's saying. Let them learn by putting their feet in their mouths.
Yeah.
Okay, well, on that lovely piece of advice, I do see we're starting to get some questions coming in from the audience. So just a reminder, if you have questions for us today, you can email them to panel@playthefool.ca. So the first question that came in was actually addressed to Meredith, but of course, everybody's welcome to speak to it. Thomas asks, you mentioned the empowerment involved with clowning in the way clowns often work in Shakespeare as an extra conscience of the writer, a further signal of intent to call out power. Do you also think clowning has the power to help move white audiences beyond their own fragility when it comes to the exploration of issues surrounding race?
Yes.
Okay, moving on.
Well, yeah, I think I almost want to just say yes and move on, but I do think, I think just broadly speaking, one of the things I've been thinking about a lot over the past year is just, broadly speaking, just art in general. I think that the power of art to kind of move people and to have an effect on people is powerful. And I think when we use that power to make change, to represent, this may be a little bit of a tangent, but 2020 has been a pretty awful year, especially here in the US. But I have to say, one of the highlights that I will always remember for this year is there's an old Confederate monument that used to be in the square of the small town that I live in, this in Metro Atlanta. And due to some work from a local organization and a bunch of other people and some legal action, we got that Confederate monument removed. It was a piece of art that was dedicated to the Confederacy that fought to maintain slavery in the US. And we removed it. And that in and of itself isn't a piece of art, but it's an artistic doing that, removing that kind of like took that away. And there are other pieces of art in the square that speak better to our history. One of them is a piece of art that's dedicated to an educator, and it's this wonderful globe with these African-American and white kids swirling around it, and it's all about educating the youth. But again, to get directly to this question, I think that, this isn't necessarily a representational thing, but one of the things I particularly enjoy about my medical work, my medical clowning work, in addition to the other stuff I do, but a lot of it is we're working where we're not literally saying, you know, you're sick, but you'll get better. Or if you don't get better, you can at least laugh now. That's powerful. I can't address tomorrow, but right now I can make you enjoy this moment. I can help you to enjoy this moment. I can help you value even some of my more precious memories are memories when there was literally a dying person, and we were able to go in and play music, make people laugh, and make them enjoy that moment. I can't speak to tomorrow. I can't speak to the next 5 minutes, but right now, I can make you enjoy that. And that's powerful. And I think directly and or indirectly, as clowns of color, as artists, we have that power. And I think that's something that we often either take for granted or, you know, like all of us, we're hustling and we're looking for the next gig, which is part of the part of the hustle. It's part of the, it comes with the territory. But as artists, I think we sometimes lose sight of just how much power we have to move people through song, through dance, through storytelling, through clowning. And so, yeah, I said yes, and I really gave a long answer. I'll just go back to yes. And now I'm going to mute myself.
No, thank you. That was very, that was very touching. You clown. Back to business. Does anybody else have anything to say regarding the power of clowning to help break through white fragility? Pratik?
Yeah. So one thing that let's make one thing clear, that the wisdom of wisdom to do with racial things lies with the BIPoC community, and the work that needs to be done is to be done by the white community. So so listen to us firstly. Listen to our lived experience. Try to make sense of it. And then as far as clowning is concerned, and do your work, because we can't do the work for you. We are already doing the labor of living in a dominant society where we have to speak 2 languages all the time. And this is where I feel we are good. We are the best at clowning, because clowning requires you to break conventions, and we are very familiar with conventions because we operate in 2 conventions, if not 3, if not 4. We are operating all the time. We are translating all the time, so we understand what conventions are, and we know how to break them to reveal what's underneath it. So I think we do have an advantage with clowning, because we really understand those dynamics of what conventions are, what the convention of language is, and we have to learn a different language, and I use that word both literally and metaphorically. We have to learn a different language to communicate, and we have done that because we had to survive. So we have done that over ages. So now we can speak to you in a language that you understand. That's what the labor of the work of all those words of like white supremacy culture, dominant culture, all that articulation that has gone into it has to do with that is the labor that's already been put. So now we have communicated, we've almost handed it to you in a platter. So do your work, listen to us, and fund BIPoC theater companies.
Yes, that is just such a perfect segue to the next question that we received. And this really relates to a question that I wanted to ask that I didn't get to. So this one's from Michael. It says, as a clown who comes from a place of privilege and does not experience marginalization, how can I show that I am an ally, or on an individual level, is it best to step aside and create space for others, or try to pull BIPoC performers along with me into projects at the risk of tokenism? And I really appreciate this question. Thank you very much, Michael. But I'd also like to take it to an institutional level. So absolutely, let's talk about individual artists, but let's also talk about theater companies at large and how they can, be allies. Does anybody want to jump in on that one? You stumped us, Michael.
I think Pratik just addressed some of that in his previous comments.
Absolutely. June, I see you had a hand.
Well, I think the person who asked this question is, clearly thinking and trying to take all this information and apply it to their lives. And so I think that's definitely the right step. That's the right direction you're going down. And I think it may depend on project to project. But the awareness of putting yourself in that other person's shoes and going, oh, is this tokenizing or not? What are the implications? What does this mean to the other person? Having the wherewithal and the foresight and the pause before you take action, listening. I think those are all really important things. And when given the opportunity and chance, I would highly recommend people who do have privilege and power and space to offer it to folks who don't. There are so many people who don't have that space, who don't have the resources to even speak up. And therefore, we need to bring everyone up, right? Like when we bring everyone up, then we can start to rebuild. So I think where we're at right now in society, if you have the privilege, if you have the power, give it, pay it forward. That's where we can start.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks very much, June. Kiana?
Yeah, and it's a great question. And the thing for me is like, even the awareness to be asking that question is massive. It's huge, because even, I don't know, like 3 years ago or something, like no one would have ever asked me that question or been thinking about that question. I'm sure people were, but wasn't as much as at the forefront of the conversation. And to just take the time to try and figure out how to help is so beneficial, because I would 100% rather someone try to help and kind of stumble and not figure it out right away than someone not having the wherewithal or awareness to like kind of be like, you know what, how do I use my privilege to help people who aren't experiencing the same level of privilege as I am as a performer, as a person. Like, I feel like I would 100% rather somebody be percolating on that and like wrestling with the question and taking steps either in the right direction or sometimes backwards, but at least they're moving with good intentions to like bring equity to everyone. So I just think it's a major step for a lot of people even to be having those thoughts. And if you're willing to have open dialogue with BIPoC people, with those people who need the space and who want to be able to like help make change, if you can be the person to start that conversation with them, then you're so much more likely to find a solution, because everyone's going to start working as a team to bring this equity into the workplace, into the arts, into clowning, into the world. That's just a great thing to be happening.
Barry, is that a hand or is that
That's a hand, yeah. I forgot that I have a little hand thing on here. Oh no, I just bucked myself off. No, I got it. Okay. No, so like this idea of equity, I don't know, and I don't remember where it is, and I'm not trying to throw shade at them, but maybe. They refer to BIPoC individuals as equity-seeking individuals, like that we're looking for equity. And I was like, well, shouldn't everybody be equity-seeking individuals? Like, shouldn't it? If it's us looking to be included, then it totally just assumes the power dynamic. And so if this individual wants, I find it tough sometimes that some of the most invested individuals are looking for the door, are looking to be like, okay, so probably the best thing for me to do as a white person is to get the hell out of here. It's like, no, actually, I want you to stay. I want you to field questions. I want you to, hear from different perspectives and amplify people's voices. I want you to remain in the arts. If you're asking that question and you have no interest in changing the paradigm, you're just feeling guilty, then yeah, have a nice time, go do something else. But like that space that can be used, not just for a person of color, but for somebody that's invested in changing the circumstances. And I think that starts from us telling our stories, that starts from sharing our perspectives so that people can start to onboard and understand, to stop the binary and to just understand that, yeah, the things that we're facing just aren't things that we want in our society. Yeah, I'll stop there.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. Meredith?
Yeah, I'll just quickly say, I was just thinking of this as Barry was speaking. I can think of several instances where I was in a group of meetings with some other clowns and some other artists. And I sat in my chair and basically watched a couple of white people seriously advocate for more African-American voices, more BIPoC voices. And I was just kind of like, oh, this is kind of comfortable. They're doing the work. They're stepping up and making their voice heard, not for their own benefit necessarily. I mean, I think largely speaking, it is for their own benefit, kind of going to what Pratik was saying before. I think it, largely speaking, it does help everyone, but it's kind of like we need more of this, of these people here. We need more of this involvement. We need to invest more in this direction. And it wasn't directly reflecting on them directly, but over time, it makes everything better. But just to say that, like, it was refreshing to see two white people literally kind of stepping up and kind of like basically saying the things that I've said before, and basically saying it before I had the chance to. And then all I had to do was kind of go, did you hear them? Yeah, what they said, just more of that. And that may go to some of the answer to what the original questioner was asking.
Yeah, I think if I had to answer this question, I would say all of the above. You know, absolutely make space, absolutely bring us along. But, you know, I think it also goes back to what we said about tokenism. Don't just bring us along. So we're there to represent on your project, but actually listen to us, actually incorporate, you know, what we're saying. And consultation is another thing. You don't necessarily have to have the representation there, but do some consultation with the different groups that, you know, maybe aren't represented within your institution or your organization or, you know, your project even. Go out there and get feedback. If it's not sitting within your organization and you can't draw from someone there, go out and seek it. So I think do it all. Does anybody else have anything they want to add? We're getting close to the end of our time here. So I think that this concept of allyship, being allies is really big right now. And I think that's a lot of what people are going to be coming here to hear from us, is how can we move forward and make a change. So if anybody has anything else to add on that, I definitely welcome it.
I just want to say that I feel like, you know, having this conversation right now with this group has been so enlightening and empowering. It's really great to hear different perspectives from all across the continent. And this is this is what we need more of.
Absolutely.
I just want to amplify something that rang true for me from Pratik was, you know, when you're only bringing one person into the room, or the most, like, you know, accessible Indigenous or accessible person of color into the room, and then not letting them speak, you're missing out on entire worldviews, entire ways of seeing things, whole cultural perspectives that could really change the way that we function and can really, you know, make your life more interesting, more intense and stronger. And the more that we like break it down and let people let those great minds and those great artists from all different backgrounds come to the forefront, the better. To stop thinking about the numbers and start thinking about the possibilities of what people are contributing. And if you have a barrier thinking that people can't contribute that because of their social economic status or their race or their language or whatever, they're a refugee, they're probably not smart, then get out. You don't know what you're talking about. Like, educate yourself and then figure it out.
Absolutely. Kiana, go ahead.
Thanks. I just wanted to say, like, the more I think about, and like June said, I'm so thrilled to have been a part of this conversation in this group of, like, really introspect this concept of, like, allyship, something that I think is often really scary when you're not a person of color approaching this topic, is the idea that talking about this, it feels taboo and feels scary, and it feels like you're going to say the wrong thing or you're not going to understand. And I think it kind of impedes a lot of people from starting these conversations and asking the questions. And of course, there's a line of, you don't want to put this weight on POC people to educate you and to teach you. But at the same time, I feel like there's a certain, like, if someone were to approach me about this conversation and wanted to learn more, if they were approaching it with curiosity and generosity and, like, an open mind and, like, a willingness to learn and discuss, like, that kind of energy around these conversations makes them less harrowing and like difficult to have, because you have these individuals who are approaching you with like this generosity of spirit. And I think that's something within allyship that could be really helpful in change and in these conversations, because instead of like meeting like this barrier, you're meeting like this receptive wall of someone really trying to understand. And I think that's all I can't speak for everybody, but in my experience, that's all I would really want from someone, is for them to be really making the effort to understand and to try and to communicate with me, and then being like, okay, I've heard these perspectives. How can I integrate them into my practice? How can I integrate them into this piece I'm creating? How can I integrate them into this theater company that I run? Like it's just the willingness to have these conversations, because even as someone who's mixed race, I often sometimes shy away because I've got like this, I'm half white, so sometimes I worry that I'll overstep or step on toes. But being willing to be brave and have the conversations, I feel like is huge. And the more people are willing to take risks, and this fear around talking about race can kind of be put aside, I think it'll be way more beneficial than to approach this with fear. You should approach it with curiosity.
Absolutely. Pratik, go ahead.
Yeah, there's an African American woman named Bettina Love that differentiates allyship and co-conspirators. And she says, we want you to be co-conspirators, not allies. And what that means is that what will you do when you see harm happening? What are you going to do to put your body in between the harm and the person being harmed? How are you going to share the hit? That's when you become a true ally. That's when you become a true co-conspirator. And I can say that in terms of some of the previous things where, the challenges that we have faced in institutions. One of the challenges that I've faced in institutions is talking about EDI work, is because when I'm there, it's a super harmful place for me to be there, where in a predominantly white space, because there's harm being caused left, right, and center. And you're asked to be vulnerable, you're asked to share your experience. So if you see that happening and you're on the table, you need to step in. Don't tell me after the meeting. Don't come to me after the meeting. Come to me then when that's happening. So step in when that's happening and try to share that.
Amazing. Barry, go ahead.
Yeah, I think sometimes we anticipate it, or we're like, ooh, we're going to be scared about it. But what I think that really means is that when there's a level of emotion or anger or frustration, or someone's shutting down because they're not being able to be heard, to just like lean into that and listen to it and understand where that person is coming from, rather than being like, oh, this is getting too much, and then try and get them out the room. Especially with anger, I think like that's a big one. Is we're hearing criticisms of the way that people are protesting. We're hearing criticisms of how people are articulating their pain, rather than just leaning in and being like, okay, let's figure this out. Let's work together and figure it out, and listen to the screaming person. I think that's kind of what I want to start to see a bit more of.
Absolutely. Awesome. Well, I really appreciate all of everything that you guys said. I could sit here and talk with you all for much longer, but unfortunately our 90 minutes are up. So first, I'd like to thank all of the panelists for being here with open hearts and the generosity to share your thoughts and stories with us. Thank you so much. Thank you to Play the Fool for hosting the discussion. Thank you, Julie and Christine, for the work you do and are committed to doing. Mostly, a huge thank you to all of you for tuning in today. You choosing to take the time to join us with open ears and open minds is a sign of hope. We can build a better future together. Thank you. Hi, hi.